The scent of turpentine and linseed oil was the only church Isabella Rossi had ever known. It was her sanctuary, the one place where the ghosts of her father's gambling debts couldn't reach her. But ghosts, she was learning, could cast very long, very real shadows. The shadow that stood before her now wore a Brioni suit tailored to perfection, its dark wool seeming to drink the light from the opulent, mahogany-paneled office. Matteo Bellini, the man they called the Shadow King in whispered, fearful tones across the city, examined her not as a person, but as an acquisition. A final, desperate payment from a man who had nothing left to sell but his own daughter. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes, his shame a palpable stench in the air, fouler than the cigar smoke curling from Matteo's lips. "She is yours," her father stammered, sliding a photograph of her across the vast desk. Matteo ignored it, his gaze, the color of aged whiskey and cold nights, fixed on the living, breathing artwork cowering before him. "I don't deal in reproductions," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. He rose, a predator unfolding, and circled her. "She has fire. Fear, yes, but fire underneath. It will be amusing to see which one burns brighter." Isabella stood rigid, her spine a rod of defiance she didn't feel. She was a canvas and he was the collector, his ownership absolute. His fingers, surprisingly gentle, tilted her chin up. "Welcome to your new life, Passerato. Little sparrow. You will find my cage is very beautiful." She flinched, but her eyes held his. The fire he saw was real, and it promised to burn them both. The letter from the Accademia di Belle Arti felt like a judgment, a summons. Professor Albinati, her mentor, had requested a meeting to discuss her disturbing decline in focus and erratic emotional state. He insisted on meeting her guardian. The word was a bitter joke. Matteo, upon reading the letter over her shoulder, his presence a constant, suffocating heat at her back, had simply arched an eyebrow. "An appointment," he'd stated, as if discussing a business merger. "We will attend now," walking through the hallowed, paint-splattered halls of her school. His imposing frame beside her felt like a desecration. Students stared, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. He was a creature of shadow and steel, utterly alien in this world of light and creation. His cousin and underboss, Marco Vella, trailed behind them, a smirk playing on his lips, enjoying her humiliation. She wore a simple dress, but on his arm she felt branded. Every step toward the professor's office was a step deeper into her gilded cage. This place, once her escape, was now just another gilded bar. "Smile, Isabella," Matteo commanded softly, his thumb brushing her hand in a gesture that looked protective to outsiders but felt like the closing of a lock. "You wouldn't want your guardian to seem neglectful." The threat was unspoken but clear. Her world was shrinking to the size of his shadow, and it was about to swallow her whole. Professor Albinati, a kind man with chalk dust on his worn tweed jacket, peered at them over his spectacles. His office was a chaotic haven of books and sketches, a stark contrast to the cold order of Matteo's world. "Mr. Bellini," he began, his voice laced with concern. "Isabella is my most promising student. Her work, it used to sing. Now it screams." Matteo sat opposite him, an image of calm authority, his hands steepled. Marco leaned against the doorframe, a silent, menacing viper. "She has been through a significant family transition," Matteo said, his voice smooth as silk, yet carrying the weight of granite. "Adjustments are to be expected." The professor wasn't satisfied. He turned his gentle, probing gaze to Isabella. "Isabella, is everything all right at home? Your father. We were so sorry to hear he had to move away so suddenly. Is Mr. Bellini a relative?" The questions hammered at her composure. She could feel Marco's sneer, Matteo's unreadable stare. She was trapped. Confess? Expose this monster and seal her own fate, and likely the professor's? Panic clawed at her throat, hot and sharp. Her mind raced for an escape, any lie, any shield. Then, in a moment of sheer, desperate madness, the words tore from her lips, a sob-choked plea aimed at the most dangerous man she had ever met. "Pretend you're my dad," she cried, the sound raw and broken in the suddenly silent room. The professor froze. Marco's smirk vanished, replaced by shock. And Matteo Bellini's whiskey-dark eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. The air in the small office crackled, thick with stunned silence. Professor Albinati looked utterly bewildered. his gaze shifting from Isabella's tear-streaked face to the impassive Mafia Don. Marco Vella's jaw was tight, his eyes flashing with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. This was a weakness, an emotional outburst he could exploit. Any other man, any other boss, would have reacted with fury at such a public display of insubordination, such a ridiculous demand. They all expected the ice to crack, for the Shadow King to unleash the cold wrath that made grown men tremble. Instead, something shifted in Matteo's expression. A flicker of something unreadable. He didn't lash out. He leaned forward, his movements fluid and deliberate. He placed a large, warm hand on Isabella's trembling shoulder, a gesture of profound, shocking tenderness. He looked at the professor, his eyes softening with a performance of paternal grief that was so masterful it was terrifying. "Forgive my daughter," he said, his voice dropping into a register of quiet, weary sorrow. "She is still processing the loss of her mother. She gets confused. She misses her father terribly, and I know I am a poor substitute." He squeezed Isabella's shoulder gently. "We are all navigating this new reality. Her art is her outlet, and I fear our family struggles have been pouring onto the canvas." He had not only accepted her desperate plea, he had woven it into a lie so convincing, so heartbreaking, that Professor Albinotti's expression melted into one of pure sympathy. In the back of the armored sedan, the silence was a living entity, pressing in on Isabella from all sides. The scent of leather and Matteo's expensive cologne filled her lungs, suffocating her. She stared out at the rain-slick city streets, watching the world of ordinary people blur past, a world she no longer belonged to. She braced for the explosion, the punishment for her public audacity. Marco, in the front passenger seat, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his face a mask of simmering fury, clearly waiting for Matteo to discipline his new pet. But the Don said nothing. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, analytical. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, devoid of anger. "That was a foolish gamble, Passerato," he said, not as a condemnation but as an observation. But a bold one. He reached across the space between them, and she flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, he tucked a stray strand of her dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for a moment against her skin, sending a confusing jolt through her. "You showed me something today. Not just fire. You showed me imagination." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You wanted me to play a part. Fine. The game has changed. I am no longer just the man your father sold you to. From this moment on, I am whatever you need me to be. Your guardian. Your protector." His eyes darkened, a possessive gleam entering their depths. "Your father. I will be all of it. And you will be mine completely." Life in the Bellini villa was a paradox of opulence and imprisonment. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating priceless art and gleaming marble floors, but every door was locked, every window fortified. Matteo, true to his strange promise, became a phantom father figure, a twisted protector. He filled a spare room with the finest canvases, paints, and charcoals money could buy, commanding her to create. "Show me what your soul looks like," he would murmur, watching her from the doorway. He bought her silk gowns and diamond earrings, clasping them around her neck himself, his touch a brand of ownership. Their conversations were a constant battle of wills. Her fiery retorts met his commanding seductions, a dangerous dance of defiance and attraction. "A cage is still a cage, no matter how gilded." She spat at him one evening over a dinner she refused to eat. He merely smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. "But even a sparrow can learn to love her cage, if the keeper is kind." His consigliere, a weary, gray-haired man named Luca, watched the unfolding obsession with growing dread. "She will be your undoing, Matteo," Luca warned in the privacy of the Don's study. "This is not business. This is a weakness." And across the city, Marco Vella was beginning to agree. He saw Matteo's fascination not as a strange game, but as a fatal flaw, a crack in the Shadow King's armor that was just wide enough for a knife. Marco didn't wait for the crack to widen. He decided to shatter the armor himself. He knew the volatile truce with the Ricci family was held together by the thinnest of threads. A single well-placed act of aggression was all it would take to plunge the city's underworld into chaos. While Matteo was distracted, spending an evening watching Isabella sketch by the fireside, A scene of domesticity so alien to his life it was almost laughable. Marco made his move. He sent 2 of his own men, disguised as Bellini soldiers, to firebomb a Ricci-owned warehouse on the docks. The message was unmistakable. A declaration of war. The city erupted. By morning retaliatory shots had been fired, and blood was already staining the cobblestone alleys. Matteo was forced into action, his focus pulled from his gilded cage and back to the brutal realities of his empire. This was Marco's plan. With Matteo consumed by the escalating turf war, Marco could consolidate his power among the younger, more ambitious capos who saw the Don's new softness as a liability. But Marco had a second, more sinister objective. He needed to eliminate the source of the weakness itself. During a feigned Ricci counterattack, a skirmish orchestrated entirely by Marco's loyalists, a black car would swerve onto the curb outside a gallery Matteo was taking Isabella to visit. It would look like a tragic accident, a stray bullet in the chaos of war, a regrettable but necessary casualty. The screech of tires was the first warning. Matteo reacted with the instinct of a man born to violence. He threw himself in front of Isabella, shoving her down behind the solid granite of a nearby fountain as the world exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. The spray of automatic weapons chewed into the stone, chipping away the carved cherubs as bullets whizzed past where they had been standing moments before. This was no stray skirmish, it was a targeted professional hit. Matteo drew his own weapon, a sleek Beretta, and returned fire with cold, deadly precision. He moved with a brutal grace she had never witnessed, no longer the calculating businessman or the possessive keeper, but a primal force of destruction. One of the attackers fell, then another. When the third saw his comrades go down, he panicked and fled. The silence that descended was deafening, broken only by Isabella's ragged breaths and the distant wail of sirens. Matteo turned to her, his face a mask of fury, his knuckles white on the grip of his gun. He scanned her for injuries, his eyes wild. Finding none, he pulled her to her feet, his hands gripping her arms tightly. "Are you hurt?" he growled. She shook her head, speechless. The adrenaline and terror were a toxic cocktail in her veins. "They came for you," he snarled, more to himself than to her. "They came for you because you are my only weakness, mia cara." In that moment, surrounded by shattered stone and the smell of cordite, the pretense of father, guardian and keeper burned away, leaving only a raw, terrifying truth. He wasn't playing a role. He was protecting what was his, and his claim had nothing to do with her father's debt and everything to do with the frantic, desperate beating of his own heart. The aftermath of the attack was a storm of quiet, controlled fury. Matteo locked himself away with Luca, the wise consigliere, for hours. Isabella could hear their low, urgent voices from behind the heavy oak doors of the study. When Matteo finally emerged, his face was carved from ice. The softness she had occasionally glimpsed was gone, replaced by the chilling resolve that had earned him his crown. He knew. He didn't have all the pieces, but his instincts, honed by years of navigating betrayal, screamed one name: Marco. With Luca's quiet, methodical investigation, the pieces fell into place with sickening speed. A disgruntled soldier who drove the getaway car, caught and squeezed by Luca's men, confessed everything. Marco's ambition had finally curdled into treason. Matteo called a meeting. Not in a boardroom, but in the cavernous wine cellar beneath the villa, a place reserved for old secrets and final judgments. The capos assembled, their faces grim, the air thick with tension and the earthy scent of aging Barolo. When Matteo entered, he was not alone. Isabella was at his side, her hand resting defiantly in the crook of his arm. He had insisted. "They must see you are not my weakness," he had told her, his voice low and intense. "You are my strength, my clarity." He had fastened a necklace of brilliant, blood-red rubies around her neck, the jewels cool against the faint bruises left by the attack. They stood before the most dangerous men in the city, not as keeper and captive, but as a king and his queen, ready to pass sentence. Marco Vella stood in the center of the cellar, a sneer still plastered on his face, though a flicker of panic danced in his eyes. He believed he had the support of the younger capos, that he could spin this as Matteo's failure to control his territory. He underestimated the power of the performance about to unfold. Matteo didn't shout. He didn't rage. He spoke with the same cold, devastating precision he had used in the professor's office. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, the testimony of the driver, the secret meetings, the money transfers. He painted a portrait of a traitor moved not by honor or a desire to strengthen the family, but by petty jealousy and greed. He told you my judgment was clouded, Matteo said, his voice echoing off the stone walls as he paced slowly around his cousin. He told you this woman, he gestured to Isabella, his touch reverent, made me weak. He stopped directly in front of Marco, his shadow engulfing him. He was wrong. She did not blind me. She gave me focus. She reminded me what is worth protecting, what is worth burning the world down for. Loyalty. Famiglia. Not the backstabbing ambition of a venomous snake. He turned to his men, his gaze sweeping over every face. The Ricci War is over. It was a lie. And the man who started it, who endangered our family and tried to murder my queen, stands before you. He didn't need to pronounce the sentence. The code was absolute. The capos, their loyalty to their Don reaffirmed, turned as one, their faces hard and merciless, sealing Marco's fate. What can a mafia boss's heart truly survive? Perhaps not love itself, but the betrayal that so often follows it. And what it becomes after, well, that's a story for another night. Tell me, what great risks have you taken for a love you knew was dangerous? Share your stories below, and don't forget to share this tale of a love forged in fire and shadow.